I think there's a lot to celebrate in British farming. And sometimes I think we're very quick as farmers to talk a lot about the difficult times. I'm not saying it's all easy, but we sometimes forget to celebrate the great successes to be able to attract a really innovative, entrepreneurial, business-minded next generation into agriculture.
I'm Mark Reeves from PKF Francis Clark, and I'll be your host in this latest episode of Business Noodles Doodles. Don't forget to subscribe to get updates and notifications on when our latest episodes are available. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by business partners Adam Henson and Duncan Andrews, who together run Cotswold Farm Park, as well as being tenants of a 650 hectare working British farm. Our listeners may also recognise Adam from BBC's Country File, and he has even been called the UK's best known farmer. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Good morning, Mark. Yeah, very well, thank you.
Hi, both. And Adam, you were saying that perhaps only one person might you have called you the best known farmer.
Indeed, yes. It is a saying that I have heard bandied around, but I'm not entirely sure it's true. I could list quite a few others.
Well, let's make a start. Let's run some background stuff. Duncan, perhaps you could start by giving our audience an idea of what Cotswold Farm Park is and does today.
Yeah, sure, Mark. So, well, just a little bit of background. The farm park was established in 1971 by Adam's father, was the first farm park in the country. It remains the largest collection of rare and traditional breeds, farm animals in the UK. And we now attract about 150,000 day visitors a year between February and Christmas, as well as 30,000 overnight visitors to our accommodation and holiday enterprise. So the business is primarily focused around the conservation and display of rare breeds of farm animals, both indoors and outdoors, where we have displays, indoor and outdoor play and activity areas, a lot of interpretation, 3-kilometre wildlife walk, which takes visitors around the wider farm so that we can interact with them on the stories we have going on around the farm. And since 2017, we've also established a holiday business, which includes a range of accommodation from touring vans and tents right through to 6-berth lodges.
Thanks, Duncan. You mentioned rare breeds a couple of times within there. I understand that's almost where the concept comes from your father, Adam, who started looking at the rare breeds and building up on the farm. Can you give us some background on that?
Yeah, sure. So my dad was first generation farmer. His father was a famous comedian and actor and entertained the troops during the war. But my dad had a passion for farming ever since he was a young boy and went off to Cirencester Agricultural College as a mature student and then got a assistant farm manager's job, and then took on the farm tenancy here at Bemborough Farm in the Cotswolds in 1962 with an old school friend of his and business partner. And they started farming with commercial sheep, cattle, and arable. But Dad started to collect old-fashioned farm animals that he recognized were becoming rare and some of them extinct. So post-war, when we were a starving nation, agriculture was asked to put its foot on the accelerator to produce more food, a very essential thing to do at the time when food security was such a hot topic. And in doing so, we left behind some of our old-fashioned farming systems, but also some of our old-fashioned breeds that didn't suit modern-day production. And some of those were lost forever, but many were still around to save. And Dad went on a mission and a journey to do that with other enthusiasts around the country and ended up with quite a large collection. And in 1971, he and his business partner, with the permission of the landlord and planning permission from the local authorities, decided to open the first ever farm tourist destination called the Cotswold Farm Park. And we still focus our work on that initial passion and idea around rare breeds conservation. So Duncan and I are very keen, as are all of our staff and team at the Cotswold Farm Park, to continue that incredible legacy. And my father was founder chairman of the Rare Breed Survival Trust that was formed in 1973, 2 years after the opening of the Cotswold Farm Park. And since its formation, no more British rare or native breeds have been lost to extinction, and it continues doing a great job today to secure the future of the diversity of our farm animals.
Okay, that's an interesting focus on that side. Talking about the two of you, Duncan, where did you and Adam first meet?
Okay, so kind of repeating history really. Joe Henson and his business partner John Neve met at the Royal Ag College in Cirencester. Adam and I met at Sealhane College in Devon. So we were there from 85 to 88, both studying agriculture, then went and worked and travelled together, going to Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and coming back home via the States, having a lot of experiences and forming a bond and a relationship which has endured till today. So we lived in one another's pockets for 24/7 for 365 days, which gave us a great chance to get to know one another even better after our college years. We then, when Adam then came back and worked for his father on the farm, I then actually went and worked for the Agricultural Mortgage Corporation and worked in banking and finance for 3 years before then going back to where I actually grew up, which was the Isles of Scilly, where I became a tenant farmer for 5 years before Adam enticed me away. And when his father was retiring, and we then went into partnership in '97.
So you went from the Isles of Scilly originally to Sealhane, which is a relatively famous college, used to be within Devon, to suddenly, did you say, spending a year on the road together?
A year on the road together, that's right, yeah.
What's your favourite moment from that, either of you? What's your favourite moment from your year's world tour?
Well, we worked incredibly hard on farms all over Australia and New Zealand, but one of the jobs we had in Australia was planting tea in the Atherton tablelands, which was a horrible job. We were out in the mud planting tea plantations, planting tea plants. They had to be planted when it was raining, so it was pretty miserable. And when the sun came out and it stopped raining, we went stone picking. And so we just couldn't wait to see the end of that job. And the light at the end of the tunnel was the opportunity to have enough money to go diving on the Great Barrier Reef. And that was just the most extraordinary thing, but was an extra highlight from what we had just been doing to then have the joy of diving on the Barrier Reef.
From my layman's perspective, working on a farm in Australia compared to working on a farm in the Cotswolds, I can't see any real similarity between the two. Are there any similarities you could draw between the two?
Well, we did a range of jobs. So we started working for a shearing gang. So we not shearing ourselves, but working as shed hands, handling thousands of sheep on various farms. We then did a harvest, and well, I was fortunate enough to drive a harvest, cutting thousands of acres of oats and wheat. Unfortunately, Adam had the job of worming 17,000 sheep in 40-degree heat. So, and that was memorable for me. I've got a lot of happy memories of that job. I think for Adam, it's perhaps he took a more jaundiced view. So we then travelled around in an old banger and clocked up about 20,000 miles as we drove from job to job working around Australia. So everything from working on tea plantations to showing cattle to harvesting to shearing. So not necessarily all entirely relevant, but actually very interesting to see how other people run their businesses, to understand the economics of farming systems, and also to see diversification, which of course is something that Adam's father introduced to this estate but long before it became a word that was commonly used in farming.
I'm just trying to envisage, perhaps, Adam, the 40-degree heat we've had recently, is that reminiscent of your Australian days?
It really is. It's why you need to start early and have a break in the middle of the day and then go back out in the cool of the evening, even though the evenings weren't much cooler. Yes, it was extraordinary to experience that. And one of the joys usually about the British weather is we have our glorious seasons and not such hot conditions in the UK. It certainly reminded me of what it was like. And looking at the grass across the farm this year, it just completely dried out. It was brown. And our Romney clean crosses that we have on the farm did forage around for pasture, but it was the sort of country you'd expect to see merinos in.
Yeah, I want to come back to the drought and the climate change type things in a little while. Let's bring that together. So, Adam, you came back to work with your family to look at the farm, etc. Duncan, you were off back from Australia to the Isles of Scilly, which must have been a bit of a cultural shock. What's the population of the Isles of Scilly? I forget.
About 2,000 people altogether. There were just over 100 on the island we were living on. So the island of Bry is just over 300 acres. We farmed a mighty 30 acres of that. And most of the island is rocky outcrops and hills. we had a fantastic time when we were there, and we were very sad to go, but had a great opportunity to come and join Adam as his father was, when his father was, and John Neve were both retiring, and we haven't looked back. The business here has grown from strength to strength. We've had a few hiccups along the way, notably foot and mouth and COVID being the two biggest ones. But we've endured. We've built a resilient business, and now we have a very diverse business employing over 20 full-time staff and up to 80 seasonal staff.
I like the description of COVID and foot and mouth as hiccups. Only a farmer would describe those two as hiccups on the way. So Adam, what drove the phone call to Duncan? What drove the background of I need a partner here or something like that?
Yeah, so I'd seen the success of my dad and his business partner in sharing the responsibilities of the farm, sharing worries and sharing successes. And I came home originally as just a livestock assistant, then took on the management of the livestock on the farm, then moved into more of an arable role, overseeing the arable. And then the diversification needed quite a lot of attention as well, as my mum was sort of stepping back from running the shop and the cafe. And so I ended up doing lots of jobs, not very well. And my financial skills are poor. I'm probably not a particularly organized person. So I was running around, rushing from pillar to post, trying to keep the ship afloat. And it was really rocky. And having been at agricultural college with Duncan and then travel the world with him and seeing his successes for AMC, the Agricultural Mortgage Corporation, and then the amazing work he had done on the Isles of Scilly, very entrepreneurial, very innovative, incredibly hardworking, he and his wife, Becky, to grow food on the Isles of Scilly, introduce more livestock, convert barns into holiday lets. I was having a conversation with him, I think, when he came and visited me up here and explaining the situation. And being the man he is, he sent me a business plan, how it might work, how he could join the business and work for me for 2 years just to make sure we could get on. And that would still be an option for him to come into the business. And then he bought into the farm and we're now 50-50 across the whole thing. And it's probably one of the best moves I've ever made in my life. It was a light shining moment for me to surround myself with people who complemented my own skills, and I could, drive the business forward, but also share ideas. And they say in a team, there's people, different people have different skills. And Duncan is a great ideas man, but he's also a deliverer, a doer, and gets things done, and has been a very pivotal part of this business to really drive things onwards and upwards. And since he joined, Duncan originally took on the arable side of the business, and I ran the diversification and the livestock. And then Duncan also was involved with this sort of more accountancy side. But then we've employed managers in all aspects of the business. So we now have a livestock manager, an arable manager, a general manager on our Cotswold Farm Park. We have a maintenance manager, shop manager, cafe manager. We've got 13 full-time staff, I think it is, and about 100 staff in total. So he and I are now very much running the business on a day-to-day basis with overall sort of directorship role, and allowing our managers to really take control of their own departments. And that has delivered success.
That's quite interesting. I think I can relate that story to quite a lot of the other podcasts we've done, in that there comes a point where an entrepreneur has to recognise what they can't do. And it seems to be very typically at that point, they either sell up and get out of the business having grown into a certain point, or have to recognise that bringing other people in. But that bringing other people choice carries significant dangers, and we've seen quite a lot of failures on that side. But I'd ask you both at that stage, why does it work between the two? Was that year of bonding? You knew each other good enough?
Yeah, I think we knew each other very, very well. We've always been very honest and straight talking with one another. We've got similar characters in there. We're both caring, kind. We have empathy in our characters, but we're both happy to listen and change the direction of things if we're in agreement. We've hardly had a cross word in 25 years of working together, and I think that you're right. I think particularly farmers' sons and daughters who are very keen to get into farming and join the family businesses may not always have the skills and attributes to be able to take the business to the next level. They'll have some skills that will be very valuable to that farm. But often there is sometimes a hang up from the more senior generations, but also sometimes the junior generation, that they don't want to spend the money to either buy in skilled labor, which can be expensive, or consultancy or business partnerships. And it's not for everyone, but I think it's definitely a move that's well worth doing, because if all you're doing is getting up at 4 a.m. and milking cows all day, and you haven't got time to do your books or fill in your base payment scheme form or whatever it may be, the business will crumble around you. You may be very good at milking cows, but if you can't do the rest, you haven't got a business. And for us, we've recognized that.
Yeah, that journey of the entrepreneur is a really difficult one, certainly at decision moments around that. Let's stick with the diversification, the business side of things. Adam, how did you first get involved with Countryfile?
Yeah, so that was back in 2001. Following foot and mouth, when, as Duncan said, we had a very, very difficult year on the farm. We had to close the tourist destination. We were heavily borrowed as a business, and we were quite exposed with the bank. We had to shut the Cotswold Farm Park and weren't allowed visitors on. And so we'd invested quite heavily a year or so before, and we were hoping for a couple of successful years to pay off our debts and drive the things onwards and upwards. And foot and mouth hit. So we were really struggling financially. But Countryfile did a presenter search on the program, and you had to send a 2-minute video of yourself in. So the old VHSs. There'll be many listeners who won't be able to remember what they are or know what they are. And my dad had done some TV work with Johnny Morris on Animal Magic, and with Phil Drabble and Angela Rippon on a program called In the Country. So I'd seen him doing some TV work and saw the success that had bought the farm park, the recognition when people relate the face of the place, what that does for the business. So before I even applied, I sat down and spoke to Duncan about it. And so we sort of worked that out beforehand. And then I applied. My wife, she works in television, videoed me very professionally and edited it quite well. So I went for auditions, then got down to the final 3. Then there was a viewers vote, and then it's changed my life.
Duncan, how does that affect you and the farm in terms of Adam's expanded role and being the face of farming, if I say it like that?
Yeah, so in the early days, Mark, relatively little. Adam was used more sporadically, but it's now become a regular, over the last 10, 15 years, it's become far more a regular part of our business lives. So Adam's away from the business, or filming here, or filming away, or doing voiceovers, or doing other corporate and media work for 3 or 4 days of the week. So that meant we have had to restructure. Otherwise, going back to a previous question about entrepreneurship and bringing skills into the business, I think the business would have stagnated, because I would have been left spinning all of the plates, and we recognised that wasn't a practical thing to do. So what has it done for the business? The PR and the recognition has helped us grow the diversification side of the business significantly. Now, it's obviously impossible to know exactly what effect it has had, but we've gone from, in 2001, about 100,000 visitors a year, to this year we'll have with our evening visitors, night visitors, in our on accommodation, to about 180,000 visitors. So we've seen a significant growth outside of the business. It's also created opportunities to raise the profile of not only the farm park, but of our farming activities. It's enabled us to engage with professionals such as Francis Clark and work together with them, as well as with other corporate bodies for which we can get involved at a sort of strategic level, but also where there are opportunities as joint ventures, including Adam for some time was the agriculture ambassador for Lloyds Bank. So it's created a lot of opportunities, and within the business, the challenges it potentially could have created, we've covered those by bringing in skills into the business, by engaging suitably qualified managers, and frankly, people who can do their jobs in that enterprise better than we can.
That's a very brave statement then from a couple of entrepreneurs, because that is the recognition point. it goes from you've relied on yourself, you can do this, to actually recognise somebody else can bring something possibly better than you to the business. That's a very difficult journey sometimes.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the letting go, the thing that stands between letting go and or not is the founder, the business owners, and that is us. But we recognised early on that there was only we could only take the business so far if it was entirely reliant upon Adam and I. We also recognise we're generalists, so and we're good at doing lots of things, but we're not excellent at necessarily doing any of them. Adam's an excellent presenter and communicator. My skills lie in finance and business planning and strategy, not necessarily in operational efficiency. So we've got a fantastic arable manager who's now managing over 3,500 acres of arable, a livestock manager who has the skills to be able to manage a very diverse range of rare and traditional breeds, as well as a top performing commercial flock, and a commercial manager in Cotswold Farm Park who's now managing over 80 staff and a business which is generating a turnover across a range of different departments. So that's not, we wouldn't be where we are now, Mark, if we hadn't got those key people around us.
Yeah, as I say, it's a very difficult journey. I've seen quite a few fail. I think it does come down to acknowledging that you've done good so far, but there are limits on that side. I just want to take a slightly different attack on a couple of comments you've made so far. I think as an outsider, it has certainly become more obvious how hard work running a farm actually is. And I noticed on your website, you try and get some of the practicalities through of how hard it is and some of the practicalities of how you produce the farm. Is that a deliberate bit on your side, Adam, of how you try to communicate how a farm actually works?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we want to be realists about the opportunities in agriculture and how agriculture can work very closely with conservation. So in the Cotswold Farm Park, we have a conservation area and we talk about that on the television. But we also need to be very clear that, it is hard work, and our arable and livestock teams put in a lot of hours to achieve the successes that they get. And as agriculturalists or farmers, there are so many things that are out of our control, whether that's the weather, the exchange rates, political change, animal or crop diseases, all of those things you can be the best farmer in the world, but you can't do anything about. And so, yes, I think it's good to recognize those. But I think as a business and as joint directors of the business that we have, Duncan and I do try and celebrate the successes we have within our own farm and how we've overcome some of those challenges over the years. But also, I'd like to think we're great advocates for trying to encourage the next generation into that agricultural food supply chain. Because if you spoke to any child or student, there's something in there in farming. So it may be an agricultural accountant or banker or a nano engineer or a marketing expert, or it might be that you want to drive machines or milk cows. And so I think there's a lot to celebrate in British farming. And sometimes I think we're very quick as farmers to talk a lot about the difficult times. And some of those are very understanding. And the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institution, Farm Crisis Network, do some amazing work. So I'm not saying it's all easy, but we sometimes forget to celebrate the great successes to be able to attract a really innovative, entrepreneurial, business-minded next generation into agriculture.
I want to come on to that generation side. I just pick up on one on that aspect of it. The Jeremy Clarkson farming series. What's your viewpoint on that, either of you?
Well, for me, I thought it was incredibly entertaining. He's a great narrator, a great writer of stories and books. He, for Amazon, can use language that you wouldn't be able to use on any other channels. And I think it reached people all over the world, and of a completely different demographic to the type of people that I'm reaching on the programs that I work for. And so it's great. I think all farming stories we can get out there has got to be looked upon as positively. What he did show was that it can be incredibly hard work. So planning, weather, all of those things that he discussed, and at the end of the day, didn't make any money. So if you're a person looking at farming and considering it as a career, you might look at that and think, well, that's not for me, which is a shame, because I think it's a very rewarding career to be in. But overall, I think it was very, very funny. I was with someone the other day, actually, at an event, and a Canadian man who runs the logistics of a railway company in Canada. And he asked where I was from, and I said, "Oh, I'm a farmer from the Cotswolds." And he said, "Oh, that's that Clarkson's Farm place." Because that's my best Canadian accent. And Diddley Squat Farm. And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's right. You've heard about it." And he said, "Hey, that man has put the Cotswolds on the map. I've never heard of that place before." And so, he's reached a worldwide audience and has put the Cotswolds on the map. And if Duncan and I, with our Cotswold Farm Park, great day out for all the family, whatever the weather, can try and reap the benefits of that, then great.
I'll come back to succession in a minute. Duncan, I just want to go from the practicality side. Obviously, this year's seen some challenges, shall we say, in supply prices, in energy costs and that type of stuff. How are you actually coping with that side of things?
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge. The number of variables that are affecting our business now are more extreme than they ever, and more numerous and more extreme than they ever have been before. And we certainly, when we wrote our budget for Harvest 22, didn't factor in that there was going to be a war and the impact that was going to have on energy costs. Harvest 22 for us overall has gone very well. We bought our fertilizer at the right time last autumn. So our input costs were constrained. We forward bought fuel. We buy about 70,000 litres of fuel forward every spring for the summer. We've been doing that now for 4 years. And we did that, thankfully, before the 24th of February. More luck than judgment, but meant we were able to lock into some very competitive fuel pricing in hindsight. The challenge going forward is for Harvest 23. So we've got very high fertilizer prices. Again, we've fixed our fertilizer prices for next year, and I think we need to know we've done the right thing. There's certainly no security going forward about where energy and gas prices are going to be. We have a farming system on the arable side of the business where we have a joint venture with a neighbour. So we actually have a separate company where we own all of the equipment in a joint venture company, and then we share that equipment across our combined arable area. So we're also sharing all of our labour across that area. So we are able to get the economies of scale by farming across 3,500 acres rather than our 1,500 acres that we farm ourselves across the tenancy and on our own contract farming agreements. So we are speculating on what prices are going to be like that next year. And the risks now, and particularly because of the cash flow implications of growing large-scale arable crops and for doing any type of farming now, are significantly increased. And from a marketing point of view, we do a certain amount of pool marketing, but we also are trying to sell into added value markets. So all of our oilseed rape either go to a local press, which is only 2 miles down the road from us, or our wheat currently goes to milling, but the millers are going to really need to step up and make sure the premiums are competitive, because the additional fertilizer costs of growing milling wheat next year means that there's going to have to be a substantial premium. Our barley will go to malting, including the winter barley that we grow, which is Maris Otter, so a rather ancient variety, a rare breed in its own right. But that goes down to Buckham Brewery, which is just south of Bristol, where they use it to produce our beer called Adam Henson's Rare Breed. It's currently selling ourselves about 30,000 pints every month, and for which we have a commission off the beer that's sold from that. So again, it's about finding ways of adding value. We can have relatively little further impact on what the overhead costs are for the farm, but we continue to look, including at ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint and impact on the farm by reducing nitrogen fertilizer use and fuel.
Well, let's pick up on that point specifically. In terms of climate change, obviously the dry weather, the adverse consequences of this summer have been very visible on the TV for the first time. Actually seeing wildfires next to motorways has kind of brought it home for all of us. How are we going to get to net zero? How can farmers actually adapt on that side, Adam, to actually make a proper contribution?
Yeah, so it is a challenge, no doubt about it. And I understand that the UK farmers are 60% better when it comes to their climate damage or positive climate contribution than other developed countries around the world. So in the UK, we're already doing a good job, but we have this vision driven by the NFU to be net carbon zero by 2040. And that isn't going to be easy, but we do have the weather on our side with our climate, in that we can grow lots of grass in plenty parts of the country, and in amongst that grass you can have various plants that suck up lots of carbon. So the regenerative farming movement, loving your soil, producing high quality food but less of it, is a strong movement at the moment, and a lot of people doing that very well. For us as tenant farmers to convert to herbal lays to build up the organic matter in our soil for 4 years before we can get a crop of wheat is quite difficult because of the downturn in our income during that time. And we're tenants, we've got to pay our rent, and we need to have a sustainable business to keep ourselves afloat. So it's not easy, but we're looking at lots of ways of reducing our carbon footprint. So using various forms of organic manure to reduce our fertilizer input, adding legumes to all of our grassland swards to cut out the use of fertilizer completely, precision farming with our arable manager, making sure we're putting the right stuff in the right place at the right time, and really trying to limit any wastage whatsoever. And then really just concentrating very closely on the business and what we measure. So we've already done our carbon calculator on the farm, and we're putting lots of things in place now, and we'll keep measuring it to try and drive things in the right direction. It's difficult, as I say, but there's a lot of work going in the wider industry, in the dairy world, in the beef world, through genetics, through feed conversion, diets, all those sorts of things to try and reduce methane from cattle too. So it's all happening, and I think Britain are really sort of front foot forward on that.
Okay. We've mentioned about tenant farmers, we've mentioned about succession a couple of times passing there. Does the fact you're tenants on the land alter the succession going forward?
Our situation, Mark, is that the tenancy is actually now in the name of a limited company. So Adam and I and our partners are the shareholders in that limited company. We've got two separate forms of tenure. The Cotswold Farm Park is a commercial lease. So the Bemborough Farm is held on a farm business tenancy. Both agreements have just over 15 years left to run, and certainly with the Adams and my ambition is that there's a successful succession to carry on the work we're doing, and also that we don't have to continue working until we're 80. The options open to us are that our shareholdings could be transferred to other members of our family, or possibly that we could have outside investors come in, or that we continue to own the business, but our management team are incentivized to continue running it in our absence, and we develop them to do it. So there's a number of options open to us. Essentially, the biggest challenge is what we don't have is a business that we can sell. So realizing the capital value of the business is difficult, maybe not impossible, but it's difficult. So, but we have 5 children between us. They're all in different parts of the world, doing different things at the moment and building their own careers. Whether any of them choose to come back and this is the right career for them remains to be seen.
Always the most difficult one at that stage with the family scattered across the world. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time. Can I ask, and I'll put each of you on the spot at this stage, what do you most admire about the other ones? Adam, what do you most admire about Duncan?
Yeah, so for me, Duncan has got incredible vision through his experience in life and his other work to take the business onwards and upwards through our tourist destination, developing our Cotswold Farm Park holidays with lodges and safari tents. So an incredible handyman who understands how to build things and how to make things work, but also because of his financial experience, knows how to make things work financially too. So we discuss very closely on ventures that we may embark on, and 9 times out of 10 we get it right. And for me, he's an amazing business partner, but also incredibly hardworking. So very, very dedicated to the business.
Thank you, Adam. Duncan, your favourite thing about Adam?
Generosity of spirit, which is comes across in a number of ways. A, he's given me the opportunity to come and join him in the business here. In fact, he and Joe and John Neve made me very welcome to the business, and actually made the transition from Joe and John to Adam and I very easy. Adam's continued in the same vein, so he's very inclusive about the way he includes me in the business and in decision making, but also our managers, and that gives us, gives Adam, but also then a business great opportunity to engage with people within our business and outside. So that's created lots of opportunities for us. So my hard-headed pseudo accountant approach towards business wouldn't have got us to where we are now, but I can build stuff and I can make the numbers add up. But we need to also, there needs to be matched by some soft skills, and Adam brings those in spades.
Ideal. Okay, last question from me on that side. Adam, what's the rarest breed you've ever encountered?
Yeah, so on the farm, we've recently introduced Albion cattle, which are a very rare breed of cattle that was only introduced onto the Rare Breed Survival Trust list 3 years ago. And I believe there's now around 250 breeding cows in the world, and we've got 12 of them.
Wow. Bit of a responsibility there as well. Ideal. So thank you both so much for joining us today and for sharing your journey with our listeners. Fascinating to hear about the business, how you've managed to actually go around the world from your base and then come back together, and also recognising how entrepreneurs actually develop and making that successful transition. And thank you to our audience for listening to our latest episode of Business Noodles and Doodles. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation.